Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we bring you the stories of people who are making a difference in the lives of others locally, globally, and digitally. We're part of Rotary International, over 1.2 million people in 36,000 clubs, all of which are dedicated to service above self. Our club has a special attention to innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. And one of the exciting things about getting in to connect with people in all parts of the world to tell their stories and allow us to share them so that they can inspire you and perhaps in your group, in your club, in your community, make similar things happen, is that we have this incredible range of stories, and so that range is something that we hope you will take a look at. You can find on our site a meetings archive. If you don't know how to get to our site, one way is through siliconvalleyrotary.com. Another is through rotary.cool. And then at the top, there's a meetings link, and you can get to the archives that way. Give it a look. This week's speaker is Elena Wason of Natün Guatemala. Elena is somebody that I've had the chance to meet in person, which is kind of a rarity for our speakers. She was up in California doing some work as part of the organization up here, and visited the school where I teach creative solutions for the global good. And she talked with my students, and they were really excited to learn about the different things that are happening there. I'm sure you will be too. If you'd like to learn more about Elena, feel free to pause this video or podcast and read the description that is on the accompanying page. But I am ready to hand it over to you, Elena. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you at the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It is lovely to be here and be able to share a little bit about what we do in Natün. So, as Resham mentioned, my name is Elena, and I am the co-executive director of Natün Guatemala. We work in the rural indigenous area of Guatemala, which is the Western Highlands. And as you can see on the screen, our main purpose as an organization is elevating indigenous rights and leadership. And specifically, what I would like to talk you through today is a very interesting transition that we have had as an organization, which I have called flipping the model. And so I want to talk to you about basically where we've been in the last 6 years, which has been a very interesting transition from one old model that we used to have and now to this new model, which centers Indigenous rights and leadership. So just a little bit of context to start with the region that we work in. So as I mentioned, we work in the highlands of Guatemala in indigenous communities. So this is majority Maya where we are. And actually, interestingly, in Guatemala, the indigenous people make up the majority of the population, and yet they are highly discriminated against in the country. And they are systemically under-resourced. So what that means is that the government does not prioritize spending in indigenous areas in a systemic manner in order to keep them repressed. And so there is a huge lack of access to public services. Indigenous communities are exploited for things like labor, but also land access and having their land forcibly taken away from them. And so all of these interconnected issues have caused incredibly high rates of poverty. Guatemala has one of the highest malnutrition rates in Latin America, and the areas where we work have even higher rates than the national average in Guatemala. And all of this is both causing and caused by huge inequality in Guatemala. So Guatemala actually, in general, is not a poor country. It's actually a middle income country, but there is a very small amount of individuals who have a huge amount of wealth at the top of society, and then there is a very, very small middle class, and then a majority who are very poor at the bottom of society. So that creates a very unequal relationship, both in terms of resources, but also who actually has power to make decisions. So all of this contributes to Guatemala having incredibly high rates of migration, which is very marked in the area that we work as well. So as you will know, in the US, there is a lot of migrants coming from Guatemala to the US. And a lot of what I'm talking about here are the primary causes of that migration. Particularly from Guatemala, migration is principally caused by economic reasons. There are obviously other reasons such as security and other things going on, but in Guatemala, it's majority economic reasons, which is why Natün exists. So we really work at the root causes of that migration. So how can we make communities places that Indigenous people can live with dignity on their land? So we basically build sustainable access to quality education, food security and nutrition, and economic opportunities. So that's the context, but I'd now like to just take you back to talk a little bit about this flipping the model transition that I mentioned at the beginning. So effectively, our history, the way that the organization started, we actually started in 2005 as a humanitarian response to a big disaster, a hurricane that devastated the area where we work. So it started off with this very short-term mindset, which was necessary in the moment, of providing food and shelter and very basic things for Indigenous communities in order to respond to that disaster. However, as the organization developed and was in 2007 was registered legally as an NGO both in the US and in Guatemala, that short-term thinking really got plastered onto longer-term programs. So it was no longer a humanitarian disaster that was out of the way, but the programs that were built around that continued to be very much thinking about how can we put a band-aid over the outcome of a problem and not look at the root cause of what that problem is. So when I talk about paternalistic programs, what I'm referring to is the fact that the programs were very much built around thinking that external people had the responses to be able to come into communities and say, this is what you need, this is how we're going to spend our money, take it or leave it, and very much around giving out things and giving out very short-term responses to issues. So this was all very externally led. So the founders of the organization are not from Guatemala. So that's what I mean by externally led. And it was very much built around a donor-centric model. So what that means is that spending is decided based on what donors want to spend on. So a donor might come and say, I would like to give 50 food baskets to this community. And then the organization would say, okay, great, we would love your money. Let's go and just figure out where to give those food baskets, even if it's not actually part of what the community has expressed is going to help them. And so it very much was a model around appeasing donors and this very externally imposed idea of what the Indigenous communities needed. So we then went through a very interesting phase, which was what made us shift the model. So in 2018, the board, through whistleblowers on staff, started investigating mismanagement of funds and actually discovered a lot of unethical practices going on in the organization. There was a lack of accountability, a lack of checks and balances. And so we went through a very deep process of kind of unraveling what was going on. And ultimately, we separated from the founders and from the local organization, which was managing all of that, because it was irreparable, the damage that was done there. So what we then focused on was accountability. So we put in a new administration at the beginning of 2019 and brought on a new executive director, and the focus really shifted to how can we be most accountable, firstly to communities and secondly to donors. And so that really meant building up the organization from scratch. So this was just 6 years ago that we started to rebuild. And so the evolution that we have been going towards in the last 6 years is really the flip side, the complete opposite of what you see on the first half of the screen here. And so we went from this short-term thinking to really going to a community development model. So this is looking at a holistic model in terms of what are the different reasons that keep Indigenous communities poor and repressed, and really thinking about the long-term work that we're able to do with communities. And that really centers around systemic change, because as I mentioned at the beginning, when you're talking about these huge systemic issues that involve on a national level, the distribution of resources, if you're only putting a band-aid over the outcome of the issue, for example, giving a family food, you're not actually looking at, but why does that family need food? What is the root causes of them being malnourished, of them not being able to afford to feed their families? And so we've really flipped to look at how can we engage with the whole system that we are in. And crucially, the part that is really the center of everything that we do now is that we are now locally and community led. So the Indigenous communities where we are have beautiful traditions, beautiful history and ancestral knowledge that have been passed down through generations and generations of Maya communities. And as you can see on the screen here, there's a beautiful picture of women and their children in the traditional dress. So here in Guatemala, it's still very common to wear traditional Indigenous dress. To speak a Mayan language is still incredibly active, and also just lots of customs and traditions that are still very much alive. And so when we talk about local and community led, it's really around them being at the forefront and them completely managing what are the responses and what are the solutions that work for them and their communities. And so a community-centric model is the flip side of a donor-centric model, where decisions are coming out of the community exclusively in terms of what they need and what programs will best support them. But not just that, but how to implement those programs and how to bring on that ancestral knowledge that they bring through generations in order to strengthen the impact of what we are doing. So that is when we talk about an innovative approach. This is our new model that we are now implementing. We are Maya-led, as you can see on the left here. We have our leadership team, who are all Indigenous except me, and we have just hired a co-executive director who is local and Indigenous. So I am now focusing just on the US side, and we have an entirely local team who are managing the work on the ground. We are community driven, so we have a program design that is entirely brought by communities. As I mentioned, we work to change systems at the root causes instead of just putting a band-aid over it. And crucially, which honestly is the ingredient which makes our work impactful, is that we use ancestral knowledge so that we are always being culturally relevant in the actions and interventions that we have in communities. And finally, I just want to make sure that that was all very kind of high-level philosophical stuff. So what do we actually do? So this is just a summary of how that has played out in terms of that local leadership, where that has taken us with our program design. So effectively, we have 3 different program areas that we work in, which are education, nutrition, health, and economic development. And they all work hand in hand because they are all dependent on each other in order to holistically create well-being within families and within communities. And so we make this little triangle, which is also very relevant in the Maya culture. The triangle with the 3 points is very important also to find balance in the Maya culture. And the center of everything that we do is centered around Indigenous rights and leadership. And what that means is that we are developing the capacity in my communities so that they are able to address and advocate for their own needs. So that means developing capacity and leadership within the community so that they can connect with the systems and they can connect with the different areas in order to advocate for what they need for their communities. And that is where the rights piece comes in, because it's their right to have culturally relevant education, it's their right to have access to quality healthcare. So all of this ties together and is really the product of the local leadership that we have entered with our new model. So that is all. I look forward to taking your questions, and please do feel free to reach out. We're on the social media channels, and we would love to hear from you.
Excellent, Elena. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce the group that we've got on the recording today. When I call your name, wave. So that includes here in the Bay Area, Shag Shagrin, our paella master for the club, because club should have a paella master. In Houston, Texas, Rory Olson and Gus, who is a frequent addition. The feline addition to our team. In Eastern Italy is our treasurer Cecilia Babkirk. She is the cool that side of the Atlantic representation for the meeting. And my name is Rushton Hurley. I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, and excited to get into the questions that we have. The first one comes from Cecilia. So she asked, what are some specific things that the organization is doing in 3 or 4 areas? So you mentioned the 3 areas, the parts of the triangle. What is a particular activity that is happening that you would say is reflective of Natün's goal of doing the work of elevating rights and also building leadership?
Yes, it's a great question. I wish I'd had more time on the presentation to go into more details. So thank you for asking. So I would highlight our malnutrition work, which is the cornerstone project of our nutrition and health department. So in our malnutrition work, firstly, I'll just say how it's connected to the other areas. You can send a child to school and give them an education, but if that child goes malnourished, their brain is not set up to be able to actually absorb the information. Similarly, connecting to our economic development work, if families cannot afford to feed their children healthy food because they don't have enough income, then malnourishment increases significantly. So we see it very much as something that connects all of the work that we do. And we actually work on malnutrition prevention all the way from preconception, which is sexual and reproductive health. We work with pregnant women to actually prevent malnutrition in the womb, which is when it can start. And we work in the first 1,000 days as well, which is working with at-risk children. We currently work with around 120 children between the ages of 0 and 3, which is really the window that we have to prevent malnutrition before the effects of it are irreversible. And in terms of the leadership development and the cultural relevance, in this program specifically, we work with comadronas, which are local Maya midwives. And comadronas are local female leaders in their communities who are very well respected, and they support pregnant women through their pregnancies. So what we do is we do leadership development with them, and we also try to connect them to the local healthcare system. So they basically provide a very culturally centered Maya medicine healthcare for women, but then also it's relevant for them to learn some of the techniques of the Ministry of Health. So what we do is we connect them so that they can learn from each other, and then women have a much more holistic healthcare service, which the idea is to reduce maternal deaths and make sure that women are having healthy births. So yeah, that's an example of a really beautiful program that we have had a lot of success in the last few years.
Excellent. She follows with a wonderful question about being in an area where there are so many organizations doing things. How do you deal with the potential competition in terms of on the ground activities with other organizations, or do you work specifically to identify communities that don't already have organizations that are embedded there in some fashion, or do you approach it in some different way?
Yeah, another great question because yeah, absolutely true. There's a lot of organizations working in Guatemala, and we approach it in two ways. One is that we very much don't see it as competition. We see that with other organizations, we all have a similar goal. You know, it will be different in a way, but our goal is to improve the lives of the Guatemalan people living here. And so we really look to how can we collaborate with those organizations and bring what we call a strengths-based approach. So what strengths do we have that we can bring to the table? What strengths do you have? And very much, as you mentioned, try not to duplicate work. So if we see that we're duplicating, we will sit down with that organization and we will make sure that we are distributing our resources in a way that makes sense. And the other response to that is that we really are passionate about connecting with the public sector. So one thing that is common in Guatemala is that because there are so many nonprofits working here, the government sometimes will kind of look at particularly our populated area of nonprofits and they'll sit back and they'll go, "Oh, great, you guys got this. Like we're just going to go over here." You know, they will leave or they will not fulfill their obligations because they think that nonprofits will do it for them. We actually believe in holding the government account to its responsibilities. They do have resources in the government. As I mentioned, they often will choose not to invest in Indigenous communities. And so what we do is, again, we partner with the government institutions to make sure that we are supporting them to do their job and again, bringing something to the table, but saying, but you also have to bring something to the table. And together we're going to address these issues. So we have a lot of actual formal and informal partnerships with different governmental institutions as well, which we consider really important to address this systemic issue that I was mentioning at the beginning.
All right. So let's shift slightly and talk a little bit about the leadership of the people in the community that you serve, and
Mhm.
specifically in bringing people into the organization. You had the slide that shows the picture of your leadership team. I am curious what they have suggested as a part of the renewed organization that has proven to be a special story of success for Natun. You know, is it that someone came in and said, you know, I'd like for us to begin focusing on this in this fashion, and in following that suggestion, you ended up with something that has been a real story to tell as you look for support for what you do, or how has that worked?
Yeah, definitely all of what you heard today was the product of our local staff's input. The bones of the programs that I mentioned, the three areas, education, nutrition, health, and economic development, that actually came from the past, not in the same structure, but that kind of idea of this holistic development that came from our old organization. So what the local staff who came in, who were all experts in those different areas, we hire very high caliber local Indigenous staff. They really came in to deepen the work that we're doing. So rather than completely shift and change direction, it was really how can we make this truly impactful and truly connected to the local culture. And so that what that looked like was, as I mentioned, shifting from this short-term thinking to what are actually the long-term interventions that we need to do here. And also it looked like connecting the programs. So now all of the programs work together. It's actually sometimes even hard to define them as three separate areas because they work so much together. And I think the point, as I have already mentioned, but I will continue to say, is the cultural piece is really bringing in those ancestral knowledge and techniques and being able to connect with the community. You know, the communities where we work, they almost exclusively speak Kaqchikel, which is the Mayan language, the Mayan group that we work with, and so the need to implement all of our programs in Kaqchikel is strong. And so the local staff have been able to bridge those connections with with community members and really gain their trust through it being implemented by local actors. So yeah, that's a summary, but really it's the essence of everything that we do has come from the leadership of our local staff.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the supporters of Natun as it is now constituted. What are the things that for you have proven the most interesting to the people you talk to? Because you are essentially overseeing the U.S. side of the organization. What do you find people want to do that is in line with what Natun now is, and the flip side of that coin is, what do people say they want to do that you have to explain that that's actually not how we work?
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting because we have a very broad range of supporters. We have Rotary clubs who support us, individual donors, family foundations, some bigger level institutional grants. And I think we've seen a shift really since the pandemic. And before the pandemic, our economic development work was very minimal. But since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of funding and a lot of people very interested in supporting our economic development work. And I think the shift that we had to make really with our donors in terms of what they were interested in was the shift away from having a say in where the money goes. Of course, donors can still express like, oh, I'm really interested in this area of the work that you do. I want to fund that. But that's different to coming to us and saying, I have this really great idea that I think you should do, and here's $10,000 towards it. It's a shift in dynamic where the donors are now expected to listen to what we as an organization are saying works, and then we can connect their interest based on that rather than the dynamic coming from donors. And yeah, I think we used to be a lot more hands-on. So donors used to be able to come down and do some more hands-on projects, but now a wonderful time with visitors, but it's shifted very much to be observing the work that we're doing rather than being able to contribute to the work that we're doing in a physical way. And that is because now we mainly do capacity building in Kaqchikel. And so unfortunately, there's a limited scope for somebody well-meaning from the US to come down and actually contribute in person to that program. But what we love is connecting people to our programs in other ways. So yeah, there's still lots of opportunity to connect with what we do.
Well, let's finish with focusing on how Rotary clubs might be involved and might get involved. So, what are some of the ideal ways a Rotary club would be connected to Natun, supporting your efforts? Is it through our global grants program? Is it through a different approach? How does that work?
Yeah, we have a few Rotary clubs who support us already, and some who have supported us for quite a few years, which we very much appreciate. We actually work across all but one of the Rotary focus areas. Such as, water and sanitation, environment, women's health. And so we have been able to connect really well with Rotary clubs in terms of connecting with the interests of each club. We often are aligned with clubs who are looking to do international service projects. In terms of the source of the funding, we have individual Rotary clubs who support us through their service committees, which is great. And we don't currently have a global grant, but we do have an idea to do a water project with a global grant, which we would love to be able to advance at some point. But as you probably know, global grants are a big operation and require lots of different clubs chipping in and require quite a big budget often to do a big project. And so it's something that we're still kind of piecing together. But yeah, there's lots of ways that we love to get involved in Rotary clubs. We have clubs that come down to visit us every year. We actually have Santa Barbara Rotary Club coming down next week, which we're really excited about. And they've funded an infrastructure project in our office. So they're coming down to help us basically chop down parts of our office and rebuild where necessary. So yeah, it really depends on the interest of the club, but we really enjoy connecting with Rotary Club. So we would love to hear from anybody who would like to chat more.
Wonderful. That's a good place for us to wind things down as we are at about that time. So, someone watching this, you might be a Rotarian. We hope that you will take time to share this recorded story with others in your club and in clubs in your area. We also hope that you will get to know Rotary better. If you are not a Rotarian and want to learn more, you can go to rotary.org to learn more about the International Service Organization that has been around for 120 years and that we're very proud to be part of. One of the things that we always like to do is to make sure that the clarity of the point of the speaker is something that we can emphasize as we finish up. And so, as we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. Elena, what would you like people to have clearly in mind as they finish watching this video or listening to the podcast?
I would like to, the takeaway point from here to be around the power of local leadership and the power of truly listening to local expertise to be able to have an impact with work that you're doing in other countries.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank everyone for taking part and listening and watching. And we will see you next week.